Hello everyone, and welcome to Mystic Fantasy Craft. My name is Ben, and I'm a co-owner of Mystic Fantasy Craft. And in this channel, we're going to talk about 3D printing, some techniques, how to hone your prints to get things to look nice, and all that kind of stuff. Today I want to talk to everyone about resin smoothing your 3D prints. I've been smoothing and painting 3D prints for a couple of years now as part of the business, and this somewhat newish method has come out about smoothing your prints. And so you can watch other videos about how to actually do the smoothing, but I'm going to go through it and I'm going to give you a close-up of the difference between what happens if you do resin smoothing on a print like this. This was resin smooth, versus if you just put a bunch of filler primer on it. So I'm going to give you a close-up to show you guys the difference. So I'll bring the camera in and let's get started. So the first thing anyone should ever talk about when they're talking about doing anything involving resin is safety, and this channel is going to be no different. So the standard equipment applies here. Before handling any resin, everyone should be using safety goggles, latex gloves or vinyl gloves, and a respirator at the very minimum. I mean, resin is very toxic, both in pure version and when you go to sand it. So definitely don't skip these steps because resin can have a lot of bad long-term effects. So make sure you have these safety tools when you're working with resin. So for those of you who are not familiar, how does resin smoothing work? Essentially, you start with a raw 3D printed part like this. See if we can get the camera to focus on it there. Yep. And in order to reduce these visible layer lines, what people have actually come up with is you can take regular resin that you would use in a resin 3D printer, such as this was a purple I used for a customer, or another example is just your average anycubic UV sensitive resin. So we're going to be using UV light for this. Basically, you take it, you put a light coating or two over the top of this, and what it's going to do is it's going to act like a filler. So it's going to fill in a lot of these layer lines that you see in the print. There you go. That's a good. See all those layer lines in there? No matter how well you tune your printer, and you're always going to have those. So the quick overview is you get yourself some UV resin like you'd use in a UV printer. We're going to brush a little bit of it on there, and then we're going to cure it with a UV light. Now I use just one of these. I'm not going to turn it on. Don't look into UV light. That's bad. But I'm going to smear some on here. Off camera, I'm going to go over it with the UV light a little bit, and then we're going to see how it comes out. And the results are actually pretty nice. So we will go over that in a little bit. Alrighty, so just as a quick example, we got our gloves on, got our mask on off camera, got safety goggles. I'm gonna take some of this pre-prepared resin that I have here. This is that purple stuff that I was talking about you before. We don't have to put a lot on here, so just take the piece, rub on some resin, get a good layer on there. Remember, always wear gloves while you're doing this. Now there are going to be some burrs here because I didn't pre-sand this, but that's okay. This was a failed print. This is just to give you an idea. Okay, nice good layer on there. Perfect. Now, we're going to take our print here. We're going to turn on the UV light. Okay, I can put this down, just to make it a little easier on myself. Okay. Now make sure when you're doing this at home not to look directly into the UV light. It's bad for you. But this is real quick. I mean, when you run this through a standard resin printer, you're talking about, maybe 8 to 12 seconds of exposure time per layer. So you give this a good, I don't know, maybe 30 seconds to a minute, and you're more than good to go. Now, if you don't have a UV light at home, all you have to do is take this print out when you're done and go let it sit in the direct sunlight, and the sunlight will do the trick for you as well. I just used to print minis on my Anycubic, so this is the way to go for me. So I'll speed this up while I'm doing this. But you basically want to just do this until the outside layer is no longer very tacky. That's what you're going for. It should form a nice hard shell on the outside. So let's see where we're at here. Yeah, it still needs a little bit more, but that's, oh yeah, that's getting pretty good. That's pretty good. Sorry, this is my spray painting area. Like I said, this is a dud piece, so we're not particularly worried about this, but yeah, it's nice and hard. We're good to go there. So, just gonna grab a paper towel. Rub off any of the excess resin that may be on there, any dust that may have fallen on here. We're looking pretty good. Now, if you want to avoid pooling, like on this piece, obviously just do a few light layers as opposed to just globbing it on there like I did, but trust me, this works real good when we're done. All right, we're good to go. That is hardened. So the next step that I do is we want to scuff the surface a little bit so that we can get enough friction for the primer to go on there. So I'm using just a standard Scott bright pad, but you could use 100 grit sandpaper and up. But all I'm doing is I'm just rubbing up in one direction here. We want to get just, oh yeah. See, these are the nibs I was talking about earlier. We want to scuff the resin just enough so that it'll take a good primer. Now, those of you who have done costume pieces before, you'll know that we used to have to do hours and hours and hours of sanding. But this is going to be probably like a 10-minute video, and I'm doing this pretty much in real time. So I remember I used to take the palm sander, and I used to go from 60 grit all the way up to 320 grit just to get this flat, and then we either that or you have to spend a lot of money in filler primer. And this is, I mean, we've used a tiny amount of resin here, but let's rub off any dust. Oh, this is gonna be nice. This is gonna be nice. There you go. So now if the camera will focus on that, look at how smooth that is. I know it's hard to see, but if you go back to the earlier video where you can see all the layer lines, look at that. There's like nothing. There's like nothing on there. All right. So just to show you, now all we have to do is we take filler primer or any kind of primer. We're gonna coat this and you'll get to see the results pretty much in real time. But first I wanted to show you the comparison here between the layer lines. So this mask was one that I 3D printed. This has one layer of resin and one layer of filler primer on it. And if you look down, you can see this is the original copper color. If you look down here, you can barely at all see any sort of layer lines. Let's see if I can get this to focus. Yeah, look at that. Look how smooth that is. That's one layer of resin, which is like a brush full of resin pretty much, and then one layer of primer. Compare that to this helmet, which is no layers of resin. Let's see if we can get this to focus. No layers of resin. This is 3 heavy layers of filler primer, and look at that. That's a good example right there. That is 3 layers of filler primer with no sanding. Look at just the difference. Look at the difference between these two. So when I'm talking that this resin stuff works, this resin stuff saves me so much time and money. Because yes, resin is more expensive. The bottles are 25 bucks each, but these cans where I come from, these are like 10 bucks each, and I go through probably a whole can on this helmet, whereas I can make that resin last for a long time. Alrighty, so as promised, here's our bracer from before. I know it's not the prettiest look, but I pre-shucked this can of filler primer. We're just gonna go light coats. I'm gonna hit this side over here. Hit this side over here. You can go a little bit heavier than we would with a normal primer because this is sandable filler primer. So this is meant to come off. All right, I don't know if you can see that on the camera. Let's see if we can get it to focus. But there is pretty much no more indication of layer lines. You can see a little bit of the ridging there, but that'll come out in the sanding, I promise you. Now, just to kind of show you, this is our resin filled plus one line of filler primer. So again, I'm going to the Scotch-Brite pad. This Scotch-Brite pad is equivalent roughly to 600 grit sandpaper if you push hard, or 1,000 if you don't. So I just want to show you guys with a light. I mean, I could almost paint this right now the way it is. I mean, there's very little that's going to need to be done here. So let's go over this. That is ready to paint pretty much. I mean, I got some dust nibs in here because I'm painting in my dusty dry garage, but I mean, look at that. I mean, there's nothing for layer lines. I mean, obviously down here because I brushed it, but this is ready to paint. If I slap some paint on this, you wouldn't see layer lines. I guarantee it, even with a chrome. You know what? Let's give it a try. All right, so here we are. We've got our Rust-Oleum Chrome Metallic. Let's get a test spray, good to go. So this is, again, one layer of resin, one layer of filler primer, sanded down with a Scotch-Brite pad. Let's see how it comes out. Let's move some of these here. All right. Let me bring this in a little bit for you. Look at that. That is not bad at all. Now, let's be honest here. You can see the layer lines still a little bit, so this could have benefited from a second coat of resin. But I mean, as far as effort goes, this whole thing was put together in probably less than 10 minutes. And that is, I mean, that's a pretty nice finish, considering I didn't have to sand any of this. I didn't have to do multiple coats of primer. I mean, that's one coat of everything. So I hope this was a good example of resin smoothing. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments. And feel free to like and comment and subscribe for more. I'm going to be bringing you more videos on 3D printing, specifically 3D printing armor. Our shop, as you may or may not know already, is big into printing armor, specifically for LARPs. So feel free to follow for more. And thanks for watching, guys.